Collin Moshman here, playing as Sngman101. We have 2 stars $16 games, and today we have a really cool video because we're going to be playing a game that I'm going to call Tight or Loose. So here's what we're going to do. Right now I have my normal Poker Office statistics up, which are number of hands played, VPIP, which is how often the guy is voluntarily paying to enter the pot, the pre-flop raise percentage, how often he's raising before the flop, and the post-flop aggression factor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about common statistics and then how you can modify your game and see what the more loose aggressive players would do, what the more tight aggressive players would do, and what the idiots would do. So the idea behind this is that there's a real wide range of how tight or loose you can play. And of course the most common style is tight aggressive, and certainly the one I would recommend. But what does tight aggressive mean exactly? So if your VPIP PFR are 4-4, for instance, that would mean that you're entering 1 out of 25 pots voluntarily, and each one of those is with a raise. Well, that's really tight, and it's really aggressive, but it's way tighter than you should be playing, okay? Your standards are way too high if you're letting go of any but a hand like aces, kings, queens, and ace-king, particularly as the blinds get high, and you should be playing a lot more hands. So, kind of a common tight aggressive is something like 12-10, maybe 12-9, 12-8. And on the more loose aggressive side, there are a lot fewer guys playing a successful loose aggressive style. So I'm going to define loose aggressive as being something like VPIP over 20. So it's very rare you're going to see a guy who's maybe like 25-20 and a winning player. There are guys like that out there. Maybe the loosest are around VPIP of 30, and those are very rare. So it's not like an MTT or a cash game where tight aggressive is a very solid style, but there's a lot of room for leeway because it's really tough to play the laggy style. And what I'm going to do now is in each of these hands, I'm going to say if not only what I'm going to play and why I'm making the play I am, but if I were to fold, would that be too tight? If I were to raise when I'm not raising, would that be just throwing away chips? Or could you get away with that as part of a decent style that's just a little more laggy than conventional? Okay, so this hand is a definite fold no matter how laggy you want to be. And there are a couple other factors that affect this decision. The first one is buy-in, or more accurately, the type of players you're up against. So, like in a $16 buy-in, where I'm guessing a lot of these guys in general are a good deal looser, particularly during low blind play, and willing to call bets with weaker hands than you find in the average player doing, say, the 50s, the 200s, or whatever, then it's a lot harder to play laggy because you have guys that are more willing to gamble with you. Whereas if you happen to find yourself in a table of rock gardens, maybe at a $200 or $300 buy-in, then you can get away with being a little more laggy during low blinds because a lot of these guys are playing a very tight aggressive style on multi-tabling and simply don't want to get involved. Another factor that influences this decision is how good you are playing after the flop. Because clearly if you're opening up a lot more pots and coming in with a bunch of small raises and stuff, then you're going to be seeing more flops, and you have to be able to get away when you flop a hand that is going to be second best. Okay, in this hand, you could fold it, that wouldn't be too tight. You could raise with it barely, and I'm going to go ahead and fold. And in this particular hand, I'm going to go ahead and raise. Folding would be pretty tight here, make it 300. You wouldn't want to fold queens in early position, particularly against a guy at a low buy-in who after 5 hands has played 4 of them. So it'd be a pretty tough fold. And against a higher buy-in regular, I would lay this down. Or I may not even have come in with such a large raise initially. I'm going to call against this guy though. My feeling is that he's pretty much laggy. And so this is good. He shows down jacks. I actually thought he could show down with a lot of weaker hands as well. For instance, mid pocket pairs, pocket 5s, pocket 6s, a hand like ace 10. And that's again because kind of the default assumption at the lower buy-ins is that guys are going to be willing to get it, play very large pots and get it all in early with much weaker standards than during high buy-ins. And also, just because after the 5 hands, this guy had entered 4 of them, well, 5 hands is clearly not a significant sample size. It doesn't mean all that much, but you've got some idea when a guy's entered, he's got a VPIP of 80 after 5 hands, so he's entered 4 of 5 hands. He's definitely more likely to be loose than tight. So the upshot there was with the queens, you would pretty certainly want to play them. If you really didn't feel comfortable with that spot and you didn't know whether you should make a small raise or just shove or something like that, and you folded, that would be pretty tight, but it wouldn't be absurd. Folding aces or kings would be absurd. It would just be pretty tight. And on the more laggy end, there's not really much else to say. I mean, I raised. The only other thing you could do would be to just shove immediately or make a different size raise, and that wouldn't be so bad either. With the 7s, I'm going to lay down, in general, these low-mid pocket pairs from early position, and in an MTT I'd be more inclined to play them. And late position, or if there are limpers, or certainly play them. But if you did want to play that though, you certainly are going to be winning players that would make the decision to play that, so that would be fine. And you could either limp or make a raise. Here I'm going to fold, and okay, you've got to call this. I hope this isn't too big a surprise to anyone. And I'm not going to try to get fancy and call and let this guy get in. I'm just going to shove here. Now the 3-4 of diamonds is one that, if I was playing a higher buy-in game and knew something about my opponents, I might actually come in for a raise, because you're on the button, and it's never too big a mistake to open on the button. So it wouldn't be, you could have a successful lag that, knowing the blinds were not super loose, decided to come in there for a raise, and if called, has a pretty disguised holding, can get away from a low pair pretty easily. But if you decide to fold that like I did, that would be the more conventional play, and you certainly couldn't be faulted. So really, any time that is folded to me on the button, I'm going to be kind of like a broken record saying that, assuming you have kind of a marginal hand, that while you often should not enter the pot, if you did it, it simply is rarely a very big mistake opening from the button in just about any no-limit variation. Here folding would be fine, and that's in fact what I'm going to do. If you wanted to call there, then that would be not your best play, but it could potentially be not so bad for a more loose aggressive style. A problem a lot of times in that type of situation is you can be raised by one of the remaining 3 players to act, or you can hit a hand that it's real tough to know whether or not you're best. For instance, we had the 9-7 suited there. Maybe the flop comes 3-9 jack, and the initial limper bets it kind of strong. The second pair is usually good, but you really don't want to play a very large pot during low blinds to find out. And we'll notice also that as the blinds go up, the amount that the loose aggressive style becomes more and more common is substantial, because that's pretty much the normal style. As the blinds go up and the table gets more short-handed, you open more pots. So this is a fold. You should fold this regardless of style. You could play that from the button for sure. In fact, I would play that from the button. From the cutoff, be kind of marginal. Maybe some laggy guys could get away with that. And from the hijack or worse, you'd really just be tossing chips. Another interesting thing about these stats is the relation of VPIP to PFR. So for instance, I said that you could be a winning player with a VPIP of 25, which is true. I've seen guys like that. But if your PFR is 5, so you're entering a quarter of pots, but only 5% are you entering with a raise, then I guarantee you won't be winning. So if you are good enough to play a looser style, it certainly still has to be an aggressive one. And in this hand, doing anything now but check folding is certainly a mistake. So only if we spike a 10 would we be willing to put more chips in. So this raise suggests that he has a jack, but at this stakes, who knows? He could just be randomly raising. And he has turned a straight. Okay. And our opponent here at 8-9. A little marginal. And here, it's not the same like it is on the button. If it's forward to you in the small blind, you can't get away with an any 2 raise, even if you're in a more loose aggressive mindset, because then you're playing out of position if you're called. Okay, so here the normal caveat. You could get away with a raise. I'm certainly not going to, and generally you shouldn't. And here it'd be a worse idea than normal, because the big blind appears to be very loose after a limited sample size. Here's another good example of a pretty loose simming player who's probably not going to be a winning player. Okay, 31.3 and 0. So if 16 hands is much to go by, which it isn't, then this guy's just loose passive. The 9-3 you absolutely shouldn't be playing. 2 other guys in the pot, 2 overcards. Okay, the ace-9 is a great example for the tight versus loose game, because if it hadn't already been, the pot hadn't been entered and you could be the opener, then folding would be absolutely fine and would be the default play I would recommend, but you could absolutely get away with a raise if you were a little better at playing a lag style. And here the button doesn't appear super loose. A lot of times you just take the blinds, and it's the type of hand though where again you've got to be good at getting away when you're beat. Okay, so if you hit an ace and there's enormous betting, then you can't just assume it's good. And here, even if it had been folded, you would definitely want to fold as well. The queens is an obvious play. I'm just going to go ahead and shove. Folding them would be too tight. Yes. Okay. Come on, one time. One time. Okay. I really like losing when I'm when I'm expected to lose, like going into the flop as a pretty big dog, and then typing in raid and pretending to be really pissed off. I don't know why, it just kind of entertains me. Okay, the normal caveat there. Default's to fold. You could raise. If you did, it'd be like 225, and you better be good post flop. Okay, Queen 9 is too weak. Even in the laggy style, we can't play it. Queen 10 would be about the worst we consider. Even that would be pretty marginal. And something like Queen Jack suited, well, you could certainly fold, would be something that, if you're playing a more laggy style, would be a lot more appetizing than a Queen 10, Queen 9 suited type hand. Okay, no matter how you're playing, this is a fold. You can't call off an 11 or 12 big blind raise with a mid-king. This is another fold. Even when it's folded to us, you can't get away with raising there. And this is also a definite fold. A suited, mid-suited ace, several off the button. You really have to lay that down. You know, even in an MTT, that would be a pretty marginal open. And in a sitting go, you're really just spewing chips when you enter with a mid-suited ace from middle position. Suited ace 10, and you could fold if you wanted to, and that would be absolutely fine. That would probably be the default play, but the lag could also enter. But certainly not suited ace 5, suited ace 7, suited ace 8. KK whatever has high blind limped a couple of times, so that's something to watch out. And we would, if this was a guy who I expected to play with more often, I would note that he could be an HBL. This is a fold regardless of style. And like I said, particularly when the blinds begin getting to around 75, 150, 100, 200, and the table gets to 5-handed or 6-handed, our style is more naturally going to be going to loose aggressive. But we'll still talk about hands where you could fold. You know, maybe my style is more laggy, and I'm going to be pushing guys around a little, but we'll see what alternative plays might be. So here, this is one you definitely want to fold, regardless of style. Re-stealing, you're risking way too many chips, and you'd be relying almost entirely on the fold equity since your hand has very low showdown value, and this guy doesn't appear to be raising too lightly. Okay, now here's an interesting one. If it's folded to us in the small blind, our decision would depend a little on style, because you might be able to make a very borderline shove and eke out a small profit. And okay, I'm going to go ahead and fold this because weak aces do not play well in a multi-way pot. So even getting 7-1, it's not worth it to me. Now let's continue to assume it had been folded to me. A lag could raise that, could come into around 350, 400, and come in with a raise. If it's folded to you, you could also fold yourself, and that would be fine. And even completing wouldn't be so bad. So that's one where you can really get away with a lot of different plays depending on how you want to approach the game. And my normal play there, against the tighter guy, I wouldn't raise, even though raising's fine, because it's a really tough position to be in if he re-steals, since you'd be getting very good pot odds, and yet you definitely wouldn't want to call for all your chips. So a lot of times there I'll just complete unless I know the big blind to be really aggressive, and never let guys get away with completing on this big blind without raising. And okay, so once we had two limpers, how did that change the analysis? Well, then you really can't get away with raising, and then I think it's a lot more of a clear fold. Calling wouldn't be so out of the question, getting 7-1, but you know, for them, you're really playing that to hit two pair, that ace-5 to two pair trips, the outside chance of a straight, because hitting top pair with a weak kicker simply isn't good enough to be too confident with in a multi-way pot. Okay, we've really got to play this one, even with this guy having entered, and I'm going to go in and raise. And I'm going to be willing to play for stacks if this guy or this guy come all in, and I'll probably fold to this guy. So I'm going to make it 750 so that these two guys know they're all in if they want to play. And I want to take it heads up against a single opponent where I think I'll have a pretty nice edge. So if this guy has like pocket 5s, pocket 6s, a lot of the time you'll fold. And I suspect I'll be flipping against him, we'll see. Okay, so pocket 10's a better hand than I thought he'd have since he didn't re-raise, but that's still fine. We flip, and it doesn't work out, but okay. You still have close to 2k in chips. And you could also have called there. The only player that I think is too weak would be folding due to the strength of your hand and the fact that there are only a couple players left to act. And the one guy who had already called didn't have a particularly big stack. So if he had had me covered, for instance, then raising would be a lot more risky. But there, even if he goes all in, we're only playing for about a third of our stack. Okay, this is a fold no matter what. So one thing that's interesting was I started this game off. Well, two things are interesting. One is that this guy would shove for 20 blinds, which is pretty rough and not usually a good play. The other is that a lot of these guys are appearing pretty tight. So we're seeing most VPIPs that appear to be under 20. Okay, so in this table, the 4 guys to my left are all under 20, and the 3 guys to my left here are under 20. This is a definite fold, by the way. This kind of tight guy has raised the limper, and we've got a hand that's easily dominated. But it just goes to show no matter what your buy-in is, you can make generalizations, but you don't know a lot of things for sure. I mean, you never know. Just because a guy's playing low stakes, he's weak, or because he's playing high stakes, he's good. You know, like I say in Sending Go Strategy, he could just be drunk, he could be playing above his limit, he could be a recreational player, you know, independently wealthy. There are a whole bunch of reasons there. Here, if it's folded to us, we've got to play this, and really the only way to do it's with a shove. Because the smaller raise pocket commits us and we have to call anyway. And shoving is definitely plus equity play if you plug it into Wizard. Okay, you could fold this, you could re-steal this, and I'm going to go ahead and re-steal. You've got what appears to be a pretty clear steal raise from the button raising to 3 blinds. So I'm going to make the more loose aggressive play and come over top. Okay, this doesn't look like it's working out too good, but we're clearly pot committed to call. And he's got 10s again. Maybe we can draw out once. Okay, I got shot. Yes! Okay. So just ignore that I drew out and just pretend I was the favorite going into that, and it made some really slick play. Okay, this is a raise. We've got suited 10 queen on the button. So you could fold this, but that'd be approaching pretty tight. And I'm going to come in with my default small ball raise of around 2.5 blinds. And we flop a straight. God, every time I play these low stakes games, I get so ridiculously lucky. We've got to come out here and bet for value because there's a flush draw, there's competing. He could have 2 pair, he could have a lot of draws, a lot of possible made hands. There's no reason to slow play this. And here you've got to fold. We don't have enough fold equity coming over top. So, and now the pot's 1875. The board's really draw heavy. I'm going to go ahead and make a very large bet. And pretty much just putting myself all in, maybe making it look a little more random. And with the nuts, I guess I'll call. And I was expecting when he was so happy to commit, maybe a 2 pair like a Jack King. You know, it's kind of a weak one to play for all your chips. And this is a definite. Okay, again, you could theoretically, this is a fold for sure. This I'm definitely going to raise. Folding would be a little weak here, in particular because none of these guys are going to want to be the bubble boy when this guy only has 565 left. I mean, it's still 5-handed, but these guys are going to have pretty tight standards. So I would raise a lot more wide, and King Jack suited more than qualifies. So when we had the ace-7 of the small blind, the hand when I went over Kaza nowhere, that's certainly one where you could fold. And this guy appeared kind of loose. He's making what looks to be a pretty standard CO raise by raising the 3 blinds on the button. And with a hand that will generally be above average there and a lot of fold equity, I went ahead and made the more loose aggressive play of shoving. But certainly if you want to lay that down, which would happen to have been correct, then you couldn't be faulted for that. This is a definite shove because we're forcing this guy to either risk being the bubble boy or fold. And it'd probably be plus equity even if this weren't a bubble situation. So even though it looks like we're behind, I think that's definitely the correct push. And this I'm going to lay down. So the decision at this point in the game is a lot less one of style, but one of knowing the math. So we'll look at Sin and Go Wizard when I'm done with this game and see if I'm making any mistakes here. But pretty much it's just figuring out whether these guys, based on how likely they are to call or fold to an all-in, whether or not you're going to show profit in the long run. And again, that's more of a math problem. The 9-3 that we had here, you could raise with any 2 when it's 3 guys and you're in the button. But with such a weak hand and the fact that it'd be tough if you're restolen, this is obvious pot odds call getting 5-1. But with the 9-3, I would just lay that down. We need some kind of a hand with even minimal showdown value to want to play there. Okay, if Albatross folds, the tight guy could certainly lay it down. I would have raised, wanting to make this guy not want to risk going out second with him about to be blinded out. As is, I'm just going to fold. We have no fold equity in a weak hand. But if he had folded, I would have come in for a raise of around 700, and then folded if he had 3-bet me all in. But generally, a guy's going to fold there when his opponent looks like he's right about to get blinded out in third, and this guy can automatically move up in the money. For another 135, you have to make a pot odds call here. And you certainly have to raise your button. This size isn't super important. You could raise to 450, 550. Raising to like 700 doesn't do much good because then if this guy comes over top, you want to have an easier decision. I noticed in this hand that even though we're like a 2-to-1 dog, we were getting a much better pot. We were getting like 5-to-1 pot odds. So that's an any 2 call, regardless of style. This one I'm going to shove any 2. I wouldn't without antes, but with antes, I believe an any 2 shove is profitable. So I'm going to go ahead and shove if it's folded to me. I think you could fold without leaving a lot on the table. And I'm going to go ahead and fold this kind of junk hand on the button. You can make a pretty marginal raise folding to any kind of 3-bet. Okay, and here we get called and look like an idiot, but we're still only a 2-to-1 dog. Well, until I get the straight. So this will be an interesting one to go back and look at it with Wizard and see whether I was just stonking off chips or whether there was a plus equity play. So it's always good to check your reasoning on these things, and that's really how you learn, is making God, I've got so many random windows open. Sorry about this, guys. Okay. So this is a definite raise. But anyway, you've got to make mistakes and learn from your mistakes. So in a situation like that, well, I really believe that against a rather tight big blind like that opponent appeared to be, that's a plus equity shove. Then if I'm wrong, then I'll learn, and that's you get better at stuff like ICM and knowing when are profitable shoves. Okay, here if this guy had a higher stack, I'd be a lot more inclined to re-steal, but he's pretty much pot committing himself with this raise, so I'm not going to shove with the King Jack. Okay, this is one where again it's kind of a style. I'm going to go ahead and try to complete and then take it away at the flop. So if he checks, I'll bet any flop. You could have folded that and you could have raised that as well. And now that we've hit a gold flop, we definitely have to bet this since it's a pretty vulnerable hand. And you don't have to worry too much about being unexploitable. That is, having guys not be able to know what you're doing when it's most buy-ins, particularly low buy-in games. But there, that still is unexploitable because I would have bet if I had totally missed it. I'd bet when I hit top 2 pair. So when you limp from the small blind in a situation like that, you're looking to bet any flop. So if he folds, again, I'm going to go ahead and fold. But getting close to 4-to-1, particularly if you're a more laggy guy, you can make an argument for completing and trying to take it away at the flop against a guy who might be pretty risk averse with only 3 players left. And you could also just raise pretty much any 2 if you want to put pressure on the guy in that spot. So it's certainly a style thing. I'm going to go ahead and raise the 8-7. And you could also fold that, and you can make a smaller raise. I'd fold if he went all in, and against this guy I'm going to be pot odds committed to call if he re-raises all in. So the one important thing is when you do decide to raise from a marginal hand like that, you definitely want to have a plan for what you would do if either the small blind, well in general, what you would do if any active player decide to come over top there. Okay, this would normally be a pretty clear fold. Here we need to think about it for a sec because this guy has been attacking us every single time it's folded him with a small blind. He's betting 1,400. We've got a pot of 16, and it costs us It costs us 12 to call, so we're getting 4 to 3 odds about. And I'm gonna go ahead and fold. But you could call there, and particularly because it might make guys think twice about stealing on your blind. Okay, a lot of times I would fold or complete here, but I'll try the more laggy play and raise, folding to a 3-bet. So this is probably not my default play with a 3-4, and if I don't, so I'll make a bet of under half the pot and fold if he shoves. If, in general though, I'm gonna fold or complete. I don't usually like taking the more big pot approach in that situation, but again, it's fine if you want to. And I would shove very wide there with two guys who might want to just fold their way into second. But since Albatross should be calling a little more wide than normal, since he's very short stacked, that makes it a tougher play to get much value out of. And he certainly makes the correct call there. So if Albatross completes, I'm going to go ahead and shove. And the idea here is that I want the 475 in dead money to just be mine. And I'm fine if the button triples up, because then we still have a stage when our opponents are going to be risk averse, because there are 3 guys left. So this is a great spot, of course, we have him dominated. But even where he hit the 5, pardon me, where he hit the 5, so then he would have a stack of around 1,000, and we would still be going on in semi-bubble conditions. In other words, guys would still be a little more risk averse. Okay, here we're getting about 5 to 1 with the total chunk hand. I'm going to fold. And I really don't care about eliminating this guy. You know, if he stays in, fine. Then it just doesn't really matter that much, because I'll just go ahead and aggress. Now I would again shove very wide here. I'm going to fold this chunk hand, and I think even more loose aggressively, you should fold that, because they'd be called so often by the small blind that you need some kind of showdown value there. But it wouldn't be ridiculous to shove an E2. Okay, we would definitely call just the button. So now we're getting about 2 to 1 odds to call against 2 guys. We're probably up against 2 overs, or at best, and like ace deuce king 3 from this guy. And Albatross could be reshoving kind of light, but if he does have a pocket pair, we're going to be like an 80-20 dog. So I'll just go ahead and lay that down. And it worked out good. This guy having 5s. Okay. Calling there certainly wouldn't have been absurd. So you could have made a call there. I don't want to be too laggy. This is a definite shove. Positive Wizard would tell us it's plus equity, particularly with Albatross about to be blinded out. And this is another definite shove with a very legitimate hand. So no matter what, you would want to be raising with Queen King suited, with effective stacks of under 10 blinds on the button. And Albatross is correct to call there with any 2. So we see that he has 5s again. He can make the call a lot lighter because he's about to be blinded out, and he's getting really good pot odds. Now when heads up, the more loosely aggressive player, I mean, you can get away with shoving any hand that's not already been shoved during high blind heads up play. And you really can't get away with being too tight now. So it's kind of the opposite of the beginning. Okay, so anything but shoving here with 5 blinds and a suited king would be too tight. And you really just have to play a laggy game here. It's pretty much just, oh, nice flop. Just degrees of lagginess. So if you want to shove any 2 with stacks 10 blinds or fewer, that's fine. If you want to wait until you have some kind of a hand that's too tight, but you could get away with folding junk or just shoving the junk in some of these scenarios. But again, a lot of it's a math problem, so I'm going to pause this and quickly pull up Wizard, and we'll see if we made any glaring mistakes. Okay, I've gone ahead and opened SNG Wizard. And let's look at the first game. And the first hand that it's saying, so we call that the green check mark indicates we did good. The red X means we most likely made an error. And the yellow mark means that it was either borderline, or maybe something was fishy. This is the queen-queen hand, and it's only giving us this one, I'm sure, because we shoved with over 10 blinds early on. And that's just good general advice. So there, we obviously wanted to commit it with the queens. But Wizard is just kind of reminding you that if you're over 10 blinds deep, you need a compelling reason to play shove fold poker. So obviously, re-stealing with queen-queens was that reason, but it's a good reminder. And it likes the rest of our plays, including, I'm happy to see the 3-2 shove, which I thought was good, but you see, anytime you call in a situation like that where you're shoving with junk because you think it's mathematically correct, it's hard not to question yourself a little. So it's saying that this is pretty wildly plus CV, assuming Albatross calls 14. Now let's see what the top 14 is. And Ace 8 plus, Ace 4 suited, 4-4 plus. Well, I don't know if we necessarily call with the 4s or the 5s, but he might also call with King Queen. Let's say, well, he's certainly not calling with Ace 3. Okay, let's say this is a pretty, I'd say at most he's going to be calling 20%. So I think most likely he will not even be calling with hands like Ace 4, Ace 5, suited Ace Deuce, pocket 3s. At the same time, he could be calling with King Jack or suited Queen Jack. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this in. And with him calling 20, we're still winning nearly 0.5% in equity. So, like I've talked about before, I always like to think of these numbers in terms of dollars, and I like to think about it in terms of 10-man $100 buy-ins. So, just because it makes the math easier. So, in the 10-man 100, there's $1,000 in equity since we have 10 guys contributing $100 each. So, in that case, 1 percentage point is $10, and therefore the diff percent of nearly 0.5% would be around $5, and so it's not actually $5 in a 9-man 15, but that's kind of my normal metric for thinking about these things. So in other words, it's worth some money here. Okay, if you shove, you could fold and you wouldn't leave a lot on the table, but shoving is going to take you a few extra bucks in the long run. And, you know, again, this guy had Ace 8, so he made a good call. But I think in general, the number of folds and times that you're just going to collect the 425 on the table significantly outweigh the times you get called. And even then, you'll usually be about 2 to 1 dog to draw out. Okay, we'll go on to the second game. King, King. Okay, that's again going to be a 10 blind reminder. So we can just skip by that. And good. Okay. Ace 7. Okay, this is my ill-fated re-steal, which is saying is massively minus EV. Now, let's look at the ranges. So I'm not saying that I necessarily did right, I just don't think it's going to be maybe quite that negative. So I'm thinking that he's going to open as wide as about Queen 10, since he was kind of laggy. At the same time, I don't think he would necessarily open with King 6 suited, so we'll just leave it there, where he's folding Queen 10 and raising with King 6 suited. It kind of balances out, so this is kind of a rough range. Now, the calling of 20, I don't think I agree with. It's possible, okay? You definitely find guys who raise and simply call with about the same number of hands they raise with. In general, though, it's going to be a fair amount tighter. So I don't think ace-4 or ace-2 suited he would call the re-steal with. I haven't been super active at the table. So you want to be kind of conservative with these. So for some guys, it could be as narrow as like this. But I think here, I'd be accused of wishful thinking if I made it that narrow. So let's say that you do it with ace-6 is about the cutoff hand. Okay, so now he's doing it with calling with 3-3, ace-3 suited, ace-7, king-10 suited. I still think that might be a little wider, but some of you guys might argue it's narrower who are more experienced with the 16s. I don't know, we'll just go with that and see what it says. And there I'm still losing about 1.5%, so that would be around a $15 mistake. And clearly that was a mistake on my part. So this is, okay, I'm not thrilled to have made a large mistake on a video, but it really is kind of important. This is the learning process. So how do you incorporate this? Well, with stacks of around 14 blinds, I would know that I would need a button to be folding a substantial amount of his opening hands to have a plus equity shove with a hand like ace-7. And I would be a lot more conservative with re-steals, again, unless the guy is calling very narrow when I come over top of him. So that's really how to use Wizard to improve upon your future results. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this introduction to tight styles versus loose styles. And assuming there are no other hands that it dislikes. Oh, the pocket forest hand. Okay. Video continues. So this is so much dependent on the reads. 40%. I don't think Albatross is reshoving with 30%. Again, he could be doing it kind of wide, but I don't think he has much motive to prolong the bubble. So let's say it's actually more like 18%. And then it would be still a push, but kind of a more borderline one. I don't think that's as big a mistake. But again, you could definitely shove there, and with a lot of ranges, that would be correct. So, okay, I'm going to call it that, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Collin Moshman signing off.